Democrats are in shock as over 60% of Americans are now in support of mass deportation of illegal immigrants. So there's new polling data out, and it reveals that a large majority of Americans just want the illegal immigrants out of their country. They are sick, and they are tired of seeing swarms of non-citizens overwhelming their cities, bringing drugs and crime along with them. Now, this shouldn't really come as a surprise. The sentiment against this mass illegal migration has been building for some time now. You know it's bad when the Biden administration itself is suddenly making moves to parrot Donald Trump. It's like Donald Trump light here. They're implementing an anemic deportation plan of their own. Sort of. This is the same administration, by the way, which has fought tooth and nail against anyone, including a number of U.S. states, from attempting to stem the tide of mass migration at the border. The Biden administration has been so hell-bent on allowing millions upon millions of people to swarm our border that they have even sent federal Border Patrol agents, for example, to Texas to remove barriers of entry to illegal aliens. They cut down razor wire and they removed water barriers from Texas. They are in the middle of suing places like Texas and Iowa and others like them to stop them from handling the illegal immigration crisis on their own. And yet, they are now suddenly trying to pretend that they care. So what happened here? Well, there's polling data that has been conducted to see if the government's last-minute political election campaign actions has fooled the American people. So during a show on Face the Nation, this is CBS, news host Margaret Brennan asked Anthony Salvanto, he's the CBS Director of Elections and Surveys, about new polling data in relation to what matters most to voters, and specifically about the border crisis. Take a look at this.
Let's talk about some of the issues you say are important to voters. The border's one of them. President Biden did issue an executive order this past week. It authorizes U.S. officials to deport large numbers of migrants without processing asylum claims until the border crossings number dips below 1,500. So it's essentially suspending some of the asylum processing. Trump's been perceived as stronger on the border. Does this change anything?
No, Trump still is. More people think that Donald Trump's policies would stop or slow border crossings more than Biden's. Having said that, there is widespread support when we test in general terms for what President Biden just did. He gets 7 in 10 support on that. It's overwhelming among Republicans. It's also strong among Democrats. Look, context there. People have said they think that the border is in crisis for a
Well, yeah, I mean, the American people want to see action taking place here. And so, Biden did a good thing here is what the American people are saying.
A long time. Having said that, we have a lot of the campaign rhetoric speaking of what people say they would do. You've seen the Trump campaign talking about mass deportations. We tested that in a general way in principle. Would you support a new government program that would deport all people living in the U.S. illegally? And that finds majority favor. That finds 6 in 10. It's strongest among folks who are MAGA. It's strongest among Trump supporters, but also from some Democrats as well. And I think that speaks to the general idea, not just that people see the border as a crisis, but also where we are in the campaign, where a lot of very dramatic or new proposals out there are finding favor here.
So 62% of Americans are saying, yeah, it's time to go, illegal aliens. It appears to me that the Biden administration is flailing here, trying to do whatever they can to take back the narrative at the border. It's understandable. You've got an election coming up this year for the presidency. Now, all of this stems from President Donald Trump, who announced a plan back in September of last year that he intended to carry out the largest domestic deportation operation in American history. And despite the media trying to vilify his remarks and or mock them, it has been winning critical support from swing voters and the nation's white working class, which happens to be the same group of people that catapulted Trump into office back in 2016. But it's not just them anymore. Even a large swath of Democratic voters in this poll, agreed that they also wanted it to be easier to expel migrants from the country in a mass fashion. We're talking about 45% of Democrat respondents to the poll said that they wanted it to be easier to remove illegals from the U.S. It's no wonder the Biden administration is suddenly shifting its stance and is trying to appear like it now cares about the border, like it wants to do something. The campaign around Biden is collapsing in general, and they know that their position on the border has become so untenable that they are now clawing desperately at anything that they can do to try and shift the narrative back to them in a more positive light. Which is then going to take me to the UK Daily Mail. The article is by James Gordon and is titled "Moment CBS News Anchor is Left Stunned by Shocking Poll Showing How Many Americans Back Deporting All Illegal Migrants." He writes, CBS News host Margaret Brennan appeared to be completely taken aback on her Sunday morning show, Face the Nation, after a recent poll appeared to suggest that the majority of Americans support the deportation of all illegal immigrants in the country. Brennan noted how President Joe Biden has deported and repatriated more people in the past year than any year since 2010, noting how such deportations were legally and practically complex. She said Homeland Security says that President Biden has already deported or repatriated more people in the past year than in any year since 2010. And then, depending on the details of what's talked about on the campaign, some of what Mr. Trump talks about could be illegal. It doesn't seem practical, she said, in some sense, to round up children. And then we know that the courts have questioned whether local authorities would have the ability to do it, and federal authorities don't have the resources. So what exactly do people think they are supporting? Now, she is, of course, failing to mention that while deportations might be up, the swarms of illegal aliens at our border were also record-breaking. You had over 5 million people breaking into the country in just the last 2 years alone. So this nonsense about deportation numbers is nothing more than a smoke screen that they are using to try and deflect just how badly the border has been overrun. Now, Anthony Salvanto went on to explain that while support for the deportation was predominantly among Trump supporters, some Democrats are also backing the idea. Salvanto emphasized that public sentiment captured in polls often reflect broad opinions rather than detailed policy specifics. He said, when you measure public sentiment on this, or really just about any policy, you're getting a sense of direction. You are getting broad brushstrokes. He also explained that many voters believe the current system is not working, fueling support or drastic measures to take effect. He said a lot of folks do say yes. Again, the details of that, the specifics, you're not going to pick that up in the aggregate public opinion. We are in a different era in which a lot of folks say the system as a whole is not working. And all of these, if you connect the dots through them, are part of that reaction against it, which explains some of the general sentiment for some of these policies. Now, Brennan also conceded that she believed Americans generally want the government to take decisive actions and do something. It's amazing to me that we are only just now getting to this point. And I think watching what happened in Europe over the last 24, 48 hours is giving a lot of people on the left pause, because they are seeing that their plan for mass migration, both here in the US and in Europe and in the UK, is just despised all the way around. Anyway, the article goes on to say that Trump has proposed using the National Guard to deport illegal immigrants, planning what he calls the largest domestic deportation operation in American history. And in contrast, Biden's recent executive actions at the southern border aims to manage asylum claims and control border crossings more effectively. The Biden administration has introduced measures to suspend the entry of migrants across the southern border once the number of average border encounters in a day hits 2,500 for 7 days in a row. Why are we putting these stupid rules and restrictions on this? Blows my mind every time I see it. Anyway, the article goes on to write that the idea is to make it easier to remove newly arrived migrants should they not have a legal basis to remain in the U.S. Now, the reality is the Democratic Party has long since been an ally for the illegal immigrant. The reason for this is all about amnesty and votes. The left has been salivating at the prospect of granting the now 22+ million people here in the U.S. citizenship. They know that once, if they get this done, they get a majority of them on government handouts or welfare, then they can expect to see somewhere between 60 and 70% of them vote Democrat in all future elections. This is why we have seen over half a dozen attempts at amnesty being granted since the year 2000, and the most recent attempt was, I believe, 2021. You see, for those of you new to this program and who might have missed our conversations on this subject in the past, this has already happened before. You got to go all the way back to 1986. This is under Ronald Reagan. We granted amnesty here in the U.S. to roughly 3 million illegal immigrants at the time. Back then, it was called the Immigration Reform and Control Act, or more popularly known as the Simpson-Mazzoli Act. And out of that roughly 3 million illegal aliens that were given citizenship, roughly half of them would reside in California. California back then was a purple state which leaned red. And it had voted Republican, the state of California, in every national election from 1972 all the way up to 1988. But after the amnesty would suddenly flip, turning deep, deep blue. Because a majority of those given amnesty need government assistance, the new voter base voted for the party that promised to give them the most free stuff. And wouldn't you know it, the party that is known for pretending to be Santa Claus, well, just so happens to be the Democratic Party. With the Hispanic population, and this is key here, my friends, every presidential election since the year 2000, they have voted no less than 58% for the Democratic candidate. Let me give you some examples. The year 2000, Al Gore, 62%. 2004, John Kerry, 58%. Barack Obama, he received both 67 and 71% of the vote, respectively. Then you had Hillary Clinton, 66% of the Hispanic vote, and finally Joe Biden in 2020 at 59%. The left has been playing the long game here for the past 2.5 decades. They are so close to getting what they want. It must be maddening for the Democratic Party to see the U.S. population begin to turn against their dream. For the Biden administration to try and pretend to get tough on the border now shows just how desperate they really are. Internal polling data for the Biden administration must be much, much worse than what we are seeing in current public national polling. They wouldn't be doing this otherwise. Of course, there's no way to know for sure, but that's just my gut instinct. Anyway, my friends, that's going to wrap it up for us today from the To Be Frank shows. I am Adrian. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.